Skip. Okay, Mr. Lennox, you can start.
Thank you, Zendaya. I'd like to call to order the Town of Hilton Head Island Finance and Administrative Committee of Tuesday, July 21st, special meeting. Zendaya, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Committee members, please reply with present or here when called upon. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins?
Hi.
Mr. Lennox?
Present.
All right, and we are waiting on Ms. Becker. That's fine.
Thank you, Zendaya. Does staff have any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir, we do not have any changes at this time.
Then may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Mr. Harkins. I will second. Committee members, if you have any changes to the agenda, please state them when called upon by Zendaya. Otherwise, please vote yes or no to approve the presented agenda. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins? Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee members, are there any changes, additions, or deletions to the presented minutes? Bill? None? I have none either. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 16th, 2020? Moved by Mr. Harkins, I'll second. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkins? Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Thank you.
Zendaya,
right.
were there any comments in the open town hall site?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Chairman, public comments concerning today's agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment period closed yesterday at noon. All comments were provided to the committee for review and will be made as part of today's official record. There was one comment made for a total of 3 minutes of public comment. Mr. Chairman, at this time, we have one caller signed up for public comment.
Thank you, Zendaya. I'll recognize Mr. Hoagland for 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. A synopsis of where we are. Mr. Lennox, you are a retired banker and should know that you don't issue ATAX money to a hired DMO chamber with no proper contract. You should also know you should not have illegally loaned Kim Likens, lawyer Greg Alford, $200,000 in tax money for a private lawsuit that was also a criminal violation of state and federal banking laws. Mr. Lennox, who hired lawyer Danny Crow to tell you if the town does not have the ATAX accounting, receipts, and invoices from Bill Miles, you don't have to comply to my FOIA? And was it you, Riley, Gruber, lawyer Nesser, or even Miles involved? Why did Riley and Gruber illegally use tax money to join the town, you and all council members as chamber members? Who hired Carlton Dallas, who runs the secret Greater Island Council that some of you are involved in and Glenn Stanford used to run, to assist Bill Miles to not provide and continue hiding accounting? Mr. Lennox, why do you allow Bill Miles to not only refuse to sign a contract, but claim the use of ATAX funds as his secret sauce and none of your business, and illegally use the tax money to take to Canada and profit with ad sales, launder the money, and show no profit on year-end tax returns, and violate IRS 501-C6 nonprofit tax codes and IRS UBIT laws, and use the tax money to generate his $400,000 salary and perks? This has got to end. Mr. Lennox, you, McCann, and Harkins went to the chamber offices to see the accounting, receipts, and invoices, and in a 1-hour inspection said all was okay and honest. This is not possible. You are all simply liars and frauds. And I want to thank Mr. Riley for all he's leaving behind, because now it looks like we're going to get stuck with Gruber, Troyer, and the same corruption is going to continue. The same control is going to continue. And I think that it needs to end. Thank you very much. And I'll look forward to carrying this forward as we move forward.
We have no unfinished business. New business, agenda item 8A is John Troyer's preliminary look at our fiscal year end, June 30th, 2020. This is something we've all been looking forward to, John. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm going to walk through a few comments and just to give you a chance of a look of how we're doing so far, knowing that there's still transactions pending.
John, for a minute. John, would you like questions during your presentation, or would you prefer to have us hold our questions until the end?
I'm fine to take questions as we go. I'm fine to be, I think that would probably be the most effective.
Okay, excellent. John, as you know, we have Bill Harkins and Dave Ames and Glenn Stanford on this call.
Super. Yeah, just pipe right in, and I'm glad to take any questions. As a reference point, here's our fiscal 2020 budget and the different categories. The total of $79 million. So going into fiscal 2020, this is what our financial plan totaled. Year to date, we have $73 million compared to our $81 million collections last year. We were right at 90%. About 10% to go. There's a number of things, and just from an accounting standpoint, there's a number of collections that we get in July that actually relate to June, and so that's part of what we do is sort through payments that we received this month in July and push those back into June before we close up the year, and we're collecting those as we speak. Property taxes, you saw this look last year. Property taxes are very seasonal. And you can look to see how the months related. How are we doing on property taxes? We've met budget for our property taxes for this year. We're just about 101% of budget, and so we can say that this piece of the budget worked very well, just like we expected. How did we do to last year? Just to look at the totals, we're 1.9% more than last year. And as you recall, Town Council implemented a CPI adjustment for 1.4% last year on the millage rate. And so we're showing basically a 0.5% growth in our property tax collections year over year. How much is property taxes compared to our general fund? 36%. And so I think what you're seeing is a good diversity of income for our general fund, but our basis and bedrock, so to speak, of our revenue collections is property taxes, and that piece worked very well for this budget year. Business license income by month. You saw this last month, but you can see how back-end loaded this is. And so June is a really important month for business licenses. There's two pieces. There's a local and a state. And a big piece of this June revenue actually we get in July and count back toward June, and that's part of our year-end close. How are we doing on this so far? These are still work in progress, but you can see our local business license income, 94% of budget and growing. The state has had a change in their due dates, and they've let us know that there may be some delay in their last payment. And so we'll just have to monitor that, but it is on the way. It might be outside of our accrual window. Our normal window to count things for June ends at July 31st, and this last state payment may move into August, and so it might be counted toward 2021. And so we're monitoring that. I think it's really a good measure of economic activity. The timing may exclude it from the 2020 actual results. Here's a graphical representation. You can see how close we are on local. In a pandemic, in a recession, our local numbers still very close to our budgetary expectations, and so we're glad about that. With the state, on the other hand, we know that there's one more payment that we're waiting on, and we'll see if that's a July or August. We're thinking it's going to be an August payment.
John, I think it's important for us to track that business license revenue, even though some of it will come in outside of the window to be included in this fiscal year, for a couple of reasons. One, the impact of the state of emergency that we'll have is going to be significantly negative on a lot of businesses, to the extent that some may find it necessary to close. And I think we need to track that. And secondly, as has been the case in the past, some businesses are relocating off the island into Bluffton and the greater Bluffton area. So I assume that you're able to track the business license revenue that comes in, even though it's outside your window.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are.
Okay.
Stormwater. Did we have another question? Okay. Stormwater collections, better than budget, and so we can be happy about this area of the budget, the piece of the budget. Collected 102% of what we were expecting and planning on, and so that worked just like it should. Interest earnings, we continue to try to maximize our funds invested, and beating last year, almost 102% of last year, and so we're happy about that, and that's another piece of the budget that is working like it should. Year-to-date collections, we looked at these revenues last month on our update, and I think they're some of the more economic sensitive revenues, and so you can see our TIF, our A-tax, real estate transfer fee, beach fee, H-tax, road usage grant, and Palmetto Electric franchise fees. Year to date, we're not done. $28 million in collections. Last year's numbers for these same for the full year, but just under $35 million.
And John, you see very vividly, go back to the slide 14. I think you see vividly the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look at the beach fees, hospitality taxes, and A-tax.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. And those are the ones that are most sensitive to this.
And there'll be another slide as we get further into John's presentation that I think graphically shows this as well.
Yes, sir. These are the same numbers. We're about $7 million less than last year. If you count what was included in the accruals, and so the accruals are basically July collections that count toward June. Last year, our number was just over $7 million, and so absent the pandemic, we would have been looking at an increase year over year, but our expectations are not that. We do have accruals yet to come. Our expectations are they won't be what they were last year, but our $28 million number is going to rise, but it won't rise by $7 million, and that's what it rose last year. And this is just a little note that basically says the same thing. Our accruals are finishing up this week and next week, and we're not that far away from being able to nail those things down. Just as a comparison for these, you can see the actual collected versus the accrued amounts, and our numbers are very comparable. we'll see what our accrued amounts are compared to the 7.2 million last year. And so we're keeping a close eye on that and collecting money every day that relates to June. Expenditures year to year, even with the Low Country Celebration Park, our expenditures are modestly more than last year at $93 million compared to 91.6. We still have more bills coming in, and so there's a number of June bills that we're receiving in July and paying in July, and they'll count toward June. But at least this is where the picture is as we speak. One of our biggest expenses obviously is going to be our staff, our town staff, and all of the payroll expenses are already included in these numbers. We're at 91%, yet to spend 9% from the general fund. That's tracking similarly to last year. You can see last year's number, 90.2%, and we're at 90.9%. And yet the number is going to be slightly higher as additional bills come in. June is normally about a month and a half worth of expenses, and you can see this is 2019 actual numbers, and so it's about a month and a half if you count all the accruals on the expense side as well. How do we compare? Here the orange is 2019 and the gray is 2020, and the pattern is remarkably similar year to year on our spending. And I did want to note that if you look at February, March, April, May, and June, all of those months, the spending is less than last year. And so once we had an indication that there's going to be an issue with the pandemic, there's going to be an issue with the economy, you can see that this is responding and reacting and making savings where we can. And so I think that reflects well on the town. Year-to-date general fund expenses by month, you can see they're tracking very closely. Last year, we're not finished yet with all of our spending, but last year our total of $37.8 million, this year $38.3. So a modest increase in our general fund spending and tracking according to a normal spend pattern. Revenues are 2019 again in orange, 2020 in gray. I do want to highlight January and February, and you can look and see just how strong January and February were before the pandemic hit. And I would underscore that is that before the pandemic hit, our economy was doing very, very well. And I think because our first 9 months of collections were so strong, that enabled our response to the pandemic to be not as bad as a lot of other places. You can look and see once the slowdown and the shutdowns happened, March, April, and May are less than last year. June, all our numbers are not in yet, but you can kind of see how closely it tracks, and we're still collecting for June. We've got local A-tax yet to come, and of course, as we spoke, the state business license fees yet to come as well. And so those are a couple of bigger ones that are still outstanding. General fund revenues, they do track according to a similar model, and you can see here where we are. We're not finished with 2020, and yet we've got $38.7 million compared to a full year of $40.1 last year. If you're going to track this and put our net revenues and expenditures, or look at how closely they are, you can see that our revenue and spending here toward the end of the year are very, very close to each other. This is a full year's look, and obviously the first part of the year we start the year and operations go before a lot of the revenues come in, and so we have to run a temporary surplus, but by the end of the year we're making up for that, and our revenues catch up to our spending. You only look at the second half of the year, I do want to note just how close our revenues and expenditures have been for the full second half of the year. And so revenues have slowed down, but our spending has slowed down too. And so I think this bodes well for the town as being responsive and as responsive as we can. Operations. This is a slide from last month, gives you a little picture. As Mr. Chairman was saying, you can see here that the most affected was the hospitality tax, but it's a mixed bag also. Some are up and some are down. This is just a graphic representation of the last slide. Some are up or some are down through May. So we'll see. Looking ahead, this is a picture of our net revenues and expenses for the general fund. You can see the first 7 months of the year, we spend ahead of our revenues. And in the second half of the year, as our property taxes come in and some other taxes come in, then we ended up in 2019, you can see here in June, we ended with a surplus and a really positive year in 2019. I think that also helped us prepare for the pandemic, as that we were in good shape going into the pandemic.
John, this is a very very meaningful slide. I think it graphically shows the required use of reserves through December and January. The long bars are cumulative use of reserves to fund operating expenses. Then in February, it flips. The use of reserves have been replenished, and February shows a surplus, goes down to basically nothing in March, small surplus in April, small use of reserves in May, and last year we finished, as you recall, with a surplus of about $2 million. And think of this when John shows the same slide for 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The blue is 2020, and you can see that the blue pattern follows the orange pattern. The 2020 follows the 2019 very, very closely. We're not finished yet with the blue numbers, but you can see that we are in a small surplus through June through today. So these are today's numbers, and I think this speaks really well for the town to be able to endure a recession, a pandemic, and yet still finish the year. What it looks like is that we're going to finish with a small general fund surplus. Last month we had some key issues. We talked about maintaining control over expenditures, and I think you saw that in our February, March, April, May, and June, spending all less than last year, and so that was working very well. Continue to monitor our revenues. We're watching these every day, and we talked about June as an important collection month, and really into July counts as June. So this is what we said last year, and one of the things I think just in this bottom blue column too, I think is important to talk about is our 2020 budget was $79 million, 79.1. Our 2021 budget is less at 75.9 or $76 million. And so our spending plan for the new year is already less than what was presented and what we used for 2020. And from that, we have a number of things that we have reduced and held back just to make sure that we are on the good side of the revenue. And so I think all of these things have worked well for the town. This month we're going to see it, and we'll see it here in our final numbers. Expenditure savings are contributing to our bottom line. The biggest impact of the pandemic is our tourist-related collections. And so you can see that, as our chairman pointed out, the beach fees, the A-tax, and A-tax are all the most economically sensitive. And so we're seeing the biggest effect on that, while thankfully our property taxes have been steady and some of our other collections have been steady. And that diversity of revenue streams really helps the town. I think town council's emphasis on diversity of revenue in the past years is really paying dividends now, as well as town council's previous actions to make sure that we had adequate reserves in order to work through an economic recession, work through economic difficulties. And one of the things that look at item number 7, I think is really important. You look at, we've got special revenue fund balances, which are really helpful in order to, many of these are spent for our capital plan, and it gives us an opportunity to adjust our spending of our capital plan in accordance with the collections, and that we're not counting on those collections to meet operating expenses. There's a number of other coastal communities that those special revenues are needed for their operations, and those are the jurisdictions that are suffering the most because they have immediate operational impact. With the town, our special revenues had fund balances to offset some of the decline, and we're able to better adjust because a lot of these are dedicated toward our capital plan, and we can control the timing of the spending. And so other issues this month, we look at our H tax as primarily capital, and we can adjust there. I'd like to point out number 3, state aid tax. Our expectation is it's going to be down this year, and those funds are dedicated toward the aid tax grants and the DMO. The DMO is by state law, and so our expectations is that there will be less money available for the grants. There will be less money in the DMO, and so it doesn't affect directly the operations of the town, but it does have an effect in some other important activities that happen on the town, and so those will be important decisions here in the fall. And we're super thankful that town council had the foresight to establish the special revenue fund balances, and that allowed us a better chance to weather this storm and continue to do what the town does. We have monthly financial statements. They'll be coming out soon, and we'll keep presenting revenue details because this is super important, and we'll make sure that the Finance Committee and Town Council are well informed of exactly where we are. I would certainly welcome any comments and questions.
Glenn, David, Bill, any comments or questions for John?
I have one. Mr. Chairman, it's David. I have one.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, thank you. John, first of all, I want to recognize and thank you for your ability to present budgetary information in a clear, comprehensible way. Your graphics are great, and I think what you do builds confidence. So I really appreciate that and want to recognize it. My question is, given the decline of tax, hospitality tax, and the beach fee, what line item expenses are impacted the most?
Okay. Yes, excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Ames. With the state aid tax, it's going to be our aid tax grants and our DMO. And so the DMO is a formula, a percentage of the state aid tax collections. And so that's a straight line comparison, proportional of that. Our expectations are that the ATAX grants that the ATAX committee will push forward for the town council to consider will be at a number less than last year, and our nonprofits are going to be feeling the effects of that because there will be less money to share. Hospitality is primarily our capital plan. This year we've already noted that we're going to hold off on some fire equipment, which is primarily funded with the hospitality tax fees, and so we we've already, we've done less than what we could. And so I think our capital plan was very modest, and the rationale for that is that while this comprehensive plan was being put together, is that we would, one, keep our capital plan low to watch the economy, but in the expectation of as the economy came back, we would have a comprehensive plan, and we would get new initiatives from the comprehensive plan. And so we have built capacity in our capital plan to be able to address some of those priorities that come out of the capital plan. And so I took that as a temporary reduction so that we can tackle some bigger priorities here in the very near future. The beach fees, the other one, the beach fees are going to be set. One of the things that Mr. Riley wanted to emphasize and really try for is to try to do the next beach renourishment on a cash basis. If the collections aren't strong enough, then we may have to do another beach bond, as has been the past experience. And so maybe we won't be able to go that far and able to do the next beach renourishment on a cash basis, but we'll still be able to do the next beach renourishment on time.
Thank you very much.
Bill or Glenn?
Yes, I want to echo David's comment. This is a really clear way to see a financial picture, particularly for someone that's not a finance guy. And so I really do appreciate this clear presentation. I think that we've made the right decisions in reducing the budget. And it looks to me like the reductions in the budget are going to track correctly with what our actual results are. Am I correct on that, John?
Yes, I feel really good about this.
Excellent. Thank you.
John, and to the committee, I'd like to make comments on two elements that John described so well. First is the anticipated surplus for this fiscal year end. I think there's good news and bad news for that. The good news is that it looks like we will have a surplus of revenues in excess of expenses. The bad news is it's the result of decreased spending, and that shows how nimble the town is in being able to do that. But long term, that can be significantly detrimental. And the second comment is about the 2021 budget. The budget is less than the 2020 budget, and I think that is showing that we can be nimble again and appropriately and adequately adjust in the state of emergency. The bad news is that that's at the expense of some capital projects, and I would say again that long term we can't do that. We can't spend our way out of a situation like this by decreasing expenses related to infrastructure. So 2021 is going to be a challenge. It's going to be down a little bit, but I think the budget that John has presented previously reflects appropriately what we're going through right now. John, let me echo what Glenn and Dave said. I'm very, very comfortable and confident in the way you present the financials.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm. If they're forward to seeing what comes in the next 5 or 6 days.
Sure.
Angie Stone, Director of HR, has a presentation that will lead us into a discussion regarding the findings and recommendations of the town's 2020 classification and compensation study. Angie, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning about a very important aspect of our budget. It's not as glamorous as capital projects. People don't typically jump up and cheer when we talk about pay for our employees, but it is crucial to our ability to provide the services that we do and to maintain the infrastructure that we have. With that said, I will jump right in. Okay, you should all have my screen there. Can you see that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, very good. As I said, I'm here to discuss the classification and compensation study and its implementation. I plan to walk through this hopefully in a very logical and sequential way to give you a little history about our compensation classification program and talk about how it's evolved over the years, as well as what this particular study found and the recommendations that came out of it. So we began this study early in FY20. In approximately October, we actually started the work. And we have the consultant from our last study conducted this one as well. That's Evergreen Solutions. We subsequently began an IT study that was focused on specifically the IT organization, how it is structured, the location of our different assets, and how the policies and procedures for IT are set up. That study I mention only because it is its implementation is dependent on the implementation of the classification and compensation study. So the purpose of a classification and compensation study is really threefold. We need to periodically evaluate the health of our classification and compensation program. We need to ensure that individual salaries are appropriate based on the information that's available. We also need to prepare for the future. In terms of evaluating the health of our classification and compensation study, we take a look at our market position and determine where we are relative to our peers. We review our salary and classification structures, and that helps us to build a framework on which to make employment decisions. And we review our job documentation. Over time, our positions change slightly in terms of how they perform the work that is being done, and in some cases, the requirements of the individual holding the job. So there may be new skills that are required or potentially new certifications, that sort of thing. We want to be sure that we have accurate, up-to-date classification documentation so that we have a clear picture of what's being done and by whom. And then in terms of individual salaries, we need to be sure that each of our employees is paid based on market data as well as their relationship to others within the organization in terms of the complexity of their job and where it falls in that hierarchy. Planning for the future is critical. We have determined over the last few years that we have a need to institute some additional entry-level positions to help us in recruiting for trade-based skills that have been very hard to fill in the past. We also need to have clearer career ladders in some job families and need to be nimble enough to meet the changing needs of our community. So program health, again, the classification and compensation program really provides that framework on which to build or make our employment decisions. It gives us job documentation that lays out the specific education, experience, and physical requirements for each job. That offers us legal protection so that we can show that we are making decisions based on actual job-related requirements rather than personalities or other protected classes. We also have, it helps us maintain a competitive market position and establishes policies on which to make our compensation decisions. So it determines how we calculate salary offers for new hires, and how we calculate salaries throughout an employee's career with the town. So promotions, demotions, transfers, that sort of thing, and merit increases. So all of these aspects help to protect the town legally when we're making employment-related decisions. Next, the individual pay rates, looking at pay equity. It's very important that we be able to show when we've made a compensation decision that it is based solely on an employee's job and performance and not on any of the protected classes. So we've got a hierarchy that establishes the positions relative to each other in terms of complexity, authority, that sort of thing. We place those positions within a salary structure that is based on competitive market rates for each of those groups of positions. And then we have compensation policies and procedures that allow us to have equitable treatment of salaries throughout an employee's career. And finally, we implement broad-based changes to our classification structure as the ones that we're proposing this year, it's important that we go back and look at the individual pay of our employees to be sure that we've addressed any areas where compression may have been increased by the changes that we made in the structure, and also make sure that we haven't eliminated performance-based increases that an employee may have earned over the time that they worked with the town. And as a side note, we do not do cost of living increases for our employees. So the only way that employees move through our salary structures is based on merit. So their performance is what results in increases or changes in job. Planning for the future. This facilitates the structure that we need to have in place to enable us to appropriately reward folks for gaining additional skills or certifications. It also allows us to build some entry-level positions, again, in those trade-related skill sets and some of our administrative positions. So the changes that are being made here support that entry-level, those entry-level opportunities, and basically thereby allow us to grow our own workforce for some of these more difficult to fill positions that we've had. And that's historically been mechanics, building inspectors, that type of work. And a final positive result will be improved compensation policies. So the timing of the study, since the creation of an HR department within the town, we have done a classification and compensation study every 4 to 7 years. And that's typically what's recommended in the industry, although this latest study has indicated we probably need to do it a little more frequently given the rapid changes in the market that we've experienced recently. So probably 3 to 5 years on the next compensation study. But you can see the years here that we have conducted studies. These are essential to maintain a well-defined and legally defensible classification and compensation program. Things change over time. So in order to be sure that we are keeping current, we have to do these comprehensive studies periodically. The last study that we did in FY14, really the market data was collected at the end of that last economic downturn. So many of our peers had not yet begun to make positive changes to their salary structures at that point. We implemented that study, and there were very minimal changes that occurred in terms of employee salaries and range adjustments. Since that study, we've also been conservative in adjusting our salary ranges cumulatively over that period. We've adjusted our fire rescue ranges by about 4.5% and our staff ranges by 7%. And what's happened in the interim is that fire rescue salaries that are paid by other organizations have risen dramatically during that same time frame. So where we were somewhat competitive 4 or 5 years ago when we implemented that last study, we have lost ground rapidly. And that is of particular concern given the current, the pandemic, the fact that We have seen a decrease in the number of paramedics applying for jobs with us and have begun to see an increase in the departure of firefighters and paramedics. So right now, our starting salary for a firefighter EMT actually lags the market by about $4,000. And currently, a Bluffton firefighter who is not an EMT actually only earns $70 less per year than our firefighter EMTs who run both fire and medical calls. Our paramedic premium also slightly lags the market by about 1.5%. Our organization needs have changed over time. Again, we need some entry-level positions in some of our job families. We need to have progression related to additional acquisition of additional skills in some areas. And we need to be sure that we are accurately capturing changes in the work that's being performed, and be sure that the skills that are captured in our jobs reflect advancements in technology and those types of things as well. We also reassessed our minimum qualifications. For many of our positions, we have historically had college degrees required, whether that's an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree in many of our administrative positions. With the pandemic and changes in the way that the younger generation looks at schooling or higher education, we have seen, more frequently where we have employees who have great skill sets who may not have that actual degree. And so we went back to look at what are the actual minimum qualifications that are required and made sure that those matched up with what is necessary to do those jobs, to prepare ourselves better for recruiting in the future. So what were the findings? Overall, our general staff ranges lag the market slightly, about 1.8% on average at the midpoint. So we've done a pretty good job of managing compensation within that salary structure. Within the uniform fire rescue ranges, though, we have a much bigger gap. We lag the market by about 8.4% in our salary structure and 1.5% in the paramedic premium amount. So we also found from a structure standpoint that there are ways to better support what we want to do moving forward, and that will come as a result of narrowing the difference between midpoints of our ranges from 8% to 6%. That will allow us to have more nuanced movement within our salary structure without causing huge salary expenditures. So assessment of our current situation. Right now we are vulnerable to losing top talent, especially in fire rescue. We have a high cost of living. We are the end of the road. So in most cases, we have people who are traveling to the island and passing other opportunities where they may make exactly the same or more than they will make working for us. That was not the case 20 years ago. We led the market significantly 20 years ago, but our position has eroded over time. So we've got folks who are facing a high cost of living or a lengthy commute to get here when they could earn more working elsewhere. That has to change. We have to be able to recruit to fill our positions, and we don't want to have substandard staff, particularly in positions where they are a matter of life and death. And I don't mean to sound dramatic, but when you are the person in need of medical attention, you want to be sure that it's the best that can be sent to you that's on the way. And we have that right now. But if we don't address our compensation structure, we risk losing that. We also have some critical needs right now in fire rescue. We are short several paramedics. And unfortunately, what's happened over the last few years is we have seen a greater rate of departure on the line, including within that paramedic rank. We have also seen that the numbers, when we recruit for our firefighter pool every other year, we have seen a decrease in the number of candidates that we end up with and a dramatic decrease in the number of paramedics. So right now, our firefighter hiring pool that is supposed to last us for another year has been completely depleted of certified firefighter EMTs. And why that's a problem right now is that because of COVID-19, the fire academy is not offering classes, and we can't get folks into EMT schools. So we can't hire uncertified firefighters at this juncture to fill our vacancies, meaning we are going to have to post jobs for firefighter, paramedic, and firefighter EMT where we hire only certified folks. If we post jobs right now with the salary ranges that we have in place, we run a risk of not being very successful, given that there are a number of firefighter positions posted in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida with starting salaries that far exceed ours. So a recommendation in terms of what is emergent, we need to go ahead and implement the classification and compensation study recommendations for moving our salary ranges to make our pay structures competitive, including increasing the paramedic premium. And then as a result of that, we have to bring our employees at least to the minimum of the new salary structure. We hire firefighters in at the minimum, and they move through the ranges based on performance. And so we have many of our firefighters who've been here for 3 or 4 years who are still in the first quartile of their salary range. And so this change in the structure is going to cause them to fall below the minimum. So we have to bring them to at least the minimum. The second step of the process will be to address the rest of the more subtle points, I guess. We would need to address where employees were in the salary structure prior to the change to our salary ranges, and make sure that we've addressed all the equity issues that may result from implementation of the new pay plan. If we don't implement that second step, then I would say let's not implement the first step, because we have to have a plan for when that second step will go into place. If we don't, it will exacerbate compression issues. It will result in morale issues. We'll have firefighters who've been with us for 4 years who will have their entire merit-based increases erased by the implementation. And we will have, so years of pay for performance will be lost. We want to be sure that we don't have that as the result. We want to be sure when we make pay adjustments that it's a positive experience for our employees and that we are rewarding them for the work that we're asking them to do. I don't mean to harp on our firefighters. They are an extraordinary group of professionals, and they have served us amazingly well during this pandemic, and they are due a lot of kudos for that. We've had other employees who have also been out on the front lines during this pandemic, doing their jobs, inspections, and that sort of thing. And all of us have worked through this, but it is the paramedics who have literally put their lives on the line during this pandemic. To give you an example, kind of illustrate what would happen if we implement just step one. So if we have these 3 firefighters who are fictitious with their hire dates here and their current pay, when we implement the new pay structure, they would all go to the new salary grade minimum. None of them would exceed it at this point. If we implement the second step, that is where we adjust individual pay based on where that person was within the salary range prior to the new implementation, then we see that we've compensated that employee for the merit-based increases he or she had along the way, and we have addressed the compression issues that would result just from moving everybody to the minimum. Right now, our FY21 salary budget is almost $18 million, and that includes $500,000 for salary increases. The cost of that initial step of just implementing the new ranges and moving everyone to the minimum is just shy of $200,000. The cost of fully implementing the classification and compensation study is $964,322, roughly 5.5% of our total salary budget. So what we've got that is a little bit above what we had budgeted is 464,322. By implementing this compensation study September 1, we will have saved $160,000 in compensation. So that will have gotten us a little way towards making up that excess. And I would have to rely on John Troyer to find some additional funds to make this happen. This is kind of like when you have, house maintenance. If you need a new roof, it's not nearly as fun to spend the money on that as it is to buy new appliances or redo your floors, because you see those more frequently. But these are things that are necessary to enable us to provide the services that are critical to this community in a way that is fitting of the need. So with that, I know that was a lot. I would love to entertain questions from any of you.
Thank you, Angie. And welcome, Tammy.
Hi.
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah. First, Angie, an excellent presentation. In my experience dealing with compensation, you either stay tuned into the market and adjust accordingly, or you defer action and you pay mightily. Somewhat analogous to the earlier conversation we had about capital. And certainly a good part of this is just bringing our minimums up too, so we can compete in the marketplace. The other is certainly mission critical. This island has prided itself as having one of the best fire and rescue programs in the state and well beyond that. And that's an asset that needs watering. You need to fertilize it. You need to weed it from time to time. And listening to this analysis, it would behoove us, I think, to listen carefully to what Angie's sharing and what the consultant is sharing through her. And I think we could say of all times for this to come, but then if we ask ourselves, what's our most important resource in terms of running this town? It's the people resource. And we've already started to see signs where things aren't the way they should be. So I intend to support this, and I think it's one of those situations that if we want a well-run town, we really don't have much of a choice. So again, thank you for the good presentation.
Thanks, Bill. Other comments or questions? Glenn.
Yes, Angie, thank you very much for a clear presentation of a complex matter. First of all, are you sensing morale issues in the staff?
In terms of recent events, I would say yes, there are. We've had a lot of folks who have been working very, very hard for a long time now, particularly in the fire rescue ranks, and going on calls and worrying, am I taking this virus home to my family? Am I going to bring illness home? So there's been a lot of stress related to the COVID response. Here at Town Hall as well. We've had lots of folks who've been out in the field dealing with customers, and anytime you're in contact with someone that you're not familiar with, you're running a risk of being exposed. So I think that there are probably some very tired folks, and I would say on fire rescue, I would defer to one of our chiefs to speak more to the morale issues, but I do know that we've begun to lose more of our firefighters and paramedics, so that's indicative of potentially some morale issues.
That's certainly not a surprise. I hope we're not losing a lot of people. This problem presents, first of all, a challenge to us, because we see that it has to be done. I agree that it is something that needs to be done. for many of the changes we're facing. But our challenge, of course, is reduced revenue to some degree as a result of the pandemic. And so I think the ball is being passed to Mr. Troyer to say, where does this come from? Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Any other comment? David?
Yes, thank you. Angie, you're a very effective advocate and competent in your seat. And again, I feel a great deal of confidence in your recommendations. This is not an area that I have much expertise, so I lean heavily on your presentation. There are two aspects of this. One is the budgetary implications, and the other is the COVID consequences on our budget. And that touches on, I think, some political issues that we have to consider. Earlier in a town council meeting, we talked about deferring, actually freezing, I think was our word, salary increases. I haven't forgotten that. I appreciate John Troyer's presentation. That gave me some comfort as well. Instinctively, I hear Angie's comments about the firefighters and the EMTs and immediately recognize that we have a large retirement population on the island who probably require those services on almost daily basis. And we also have a tourist economy where people are doing a number of things that they might not do at home. We have heat issues. So instinctively, I say we have to support the EMTs and the firefighters. My question would be, can we implement both parts of this recommendation on an immediate basis, authorize the chief, Brad, to advertise for those positions that he needs and phase in other salary increases, other salary increases as more and more information is received over the next few months. I don't know how many people, how many firefighters, EMTs are impacted by this, but that would be my priority, and it resonates with me based on what Angie has said. I'll leave it at that at this point. Thank you, Tom.
Angie, would you like to address David's point?
Certainly. We have about 53 firefighters and other staff members who would be impacted by the initial move to bring people to the salary grade minimums. And certainly we have the opportunity to implement this in a stepped fashion, to do the initial piece of bringing our salary ranges up to a competitive level and bringing our folks to the minimum prior to addressing the internal equity and compression issues. What I would caution us against is leaving that for too long, doing one and then delaying the other for 4 or 5 months, because during that time you've got employees who've worked here for 4 years who will be being paid the exact same as somebody who walks in the door tomorrow. And that just smacks of unfairness. We have to advertise firefighter positions because we are short of staff. And on the town hall side of things, even on the fire rescue administrative side of things, we can fill in. If we have a gap, we can usually find somebody to cover that gap. When you're talking about fire rescue line, it's a little less doable, particularly in this current environment where we have from time to time people who are out quarantined because of a suspected exposure and we're trying to protect the rest of our workforce. So we've got a lot of factors that are playing against us currently, and so we do need to fill these vacancies on fire rescue line, and to post those without adjusting our salary ranges, I think would be a mistake. I don't think that we would get the.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting postponing the second phase, because I understand what you're saying. What I was suggesting or questioning was whether or not we could immediately approve both phases of your plan, authorize the advertising for fire rescue, EMT, and so on for those critical positions, and make a decision today that in 2 months or at some appropriate time, we then look at all the salaries beyond fire rescue, EMT. That was sort of the direction I was going in.
What is the relationship between fire rescue salary and the paramedic premium? Is the paramedic premium an add to the salary?
Yes, sir. So we have all of our firefighters are required to be at least EMT certified. We also have some that are certified beyond that to be paramedics. And so the paramedic premium is an add-on to their base pay that rewards them for that additional level of certification, as well as the work that comes with it. So they ride in charge on medical scenes and are the primary caregiver on scenes.
That's good. That's a good thing. And I think you're suggesting that the issue of timing, to David's point, would be something effective September 1st, and that September 1st would create a gap between actual salary expense and the $500,000 we have in next year's budget of about $460,000. And that of that 460, 160 of it would be saved by starting September 1 versus July 1.
Right.
And so the question to John would be, where is the 300 going to come from? You know, this issue just jumps out and smacks us right between the eyes. For a number of years, we've said that one of the biggest challenges to the future of Hilton Head Island is its ability to attract a qualified workforce. And now we're talking about that threat to the actual operation of the town. And I guess we have allowed it to sneak up on us without really thinking about how does the town attract a qualified workforce. I agree with what has been said before. Fire rescue and EMT services are quintessential to the quality of life on the island and can't be compromised. And going back to David's point, I'm not sure we have the ability to approve something like this without going through town council, because I do recall as well the temporary freeze until later in this year, and we can have a better understanding of what effect COVID-19 will have on continuing revenues through fiscal 21. I think what this committee is being asked to do, and that will force the question to the full council, is to evaluate the salary and compensation study that's been done, and Angie's recommendations as a result of that study, recommended to town council for their approval. And I think that I'm certainly prepared to do that, but I think the question will have to be answered at council is, are we to supersede an action taken by council as it pertains to the timing of any salary adjustments and or increases. Andy said it very well. Two things that really are critical in evaluating this whole thing: the urgency of it and the fairness of it. I think that she has appropriately addressed both in her recommendation. Tammy, do you have a question?
Well, I do. The discussion has been very good so far, and I absolutely agree with the fact that our fire and rescue paramedics and this island are inseparable and need to be at the highest quality, as we all expect excellence. And so definitely have a concern with that issue in particular. My overriding thoughts, however, are that the council made a decision to hold on the salaries and this compensation so that we could better understand where we would be financially with regard to COVID. And while we have had great insight with John's reports and we look good, my concern is that have we reached the point where we can say this is behind us, or should we still be at a point where we are treading lightly with regard to additional expenses? I think, Tom, you mentioned in the beginning of your comments that we would look to John as to where that money would come from. And so I think there are still some answers to be gathered, some better picture for the future, and then again, a thoughtful conversation and consideration of what will September, October, November look like, since we are currently not out of the woods with regard to COVID. And so I think that we can't forget that. So I would like some more answers before I could understand really where we're moving forward to at this point. But you all filled in the gaps pretty well with the discussion already, and hopefully that made a little bit of additional information, valuable information.
Tammy, I think you're absolutely right, and we all are sensitive to what's going to happen to revenue, and if it's something more significant than what we have forecast in the budget for 2021, how do we appropriately react and respond? That question, I think, has to be answered and addressed by council. I think one of the options that we have to get that done is to move this out of this committee to the full town council for their review. And I would expect that Angie and John Troyer and Steve would be a part of that evaluation and review.
Well, I would look forward to that further discussion and information.
Is there a motion to do just that? Is there a motion to move these recommendations on the salary and compensation study recently completed to all of town council? Bill?
Yeah, I would move that. So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any further discussion? If there is none, Zendaya, would you call the roll?
Mr. Harkins,
Yes.
Ms. Becker, I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Mr. Lennox.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Angie. To the committee, we have a need for an executive session to discuss the proposed contractual negotiations relative to the designated marketing organization's services pursuant to Section 6-4-10 of the South Carolina Code of Laws.
Move that we go into executive session for the reasons set forth by the chair.
Is there a second? Tammy? All
Second.
those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lennox.
Thank you, Zendaya. We have concluded our executive session with no action recommended. Is there any other business to come before the committee?
No, sir, not at this time.
If there is none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion from Mr. Harkins, second from Ms. Becker. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
The same. Thank you all. We are adjourned.